Do me a favor, y'all, though, really quick. Ask each other questions too. I'm trying to prove to current contributors that this is as much value to them as it is to new contributors.
Hmm.
Um, so just be friendly to each other, which you already are.
We're live, by the way.
All right.
Be friendly.
Be friendly. Hi, everybody. Welcome to November's edition of Meet Our Contributors. My name is Paris. I work at Google. We have a awesome panel today of steering committee members who are also all mentors as well. They do their part. But this session, you can address governance questions, any question about the project. And in order to do so, please use the Meet Our Contributors Slack channel. Or if you'd like to be anonymous, feel free to DM me on Slack. It's my name, Paris, that's being displayed right now in Zoom. You can also find me on Twitter as well, Paris and Bmore. I will find your question and I will get it addressed. Of course, we have a code of conduct that applies to all of our platforms. Slack, even though we don't own Twitter, we will judge you.
So will
And
Twitter.
yeah. And please be excellent to each other, panelists included. If you have something to say, please raise your hand and I will come to you. But with that, I think let's get started. First things first, we'll do some quick intros. First, George, do you want to say a quick intro? I know George is on our what we call our ones and twos, our VJ. George works at Heptio and he's awesome. And then Sarah, let's start with you for a quick intro.
Sure. I'm Sarah Novotny, and I work at Google, focusing on open source strategy. But I was deeply embedded in the Kubernetes project since I started at Google, and have done all sorts of fun stuff there. My biggest claim to fame, though, really is hiring Paris.
Thank you, Sarah. Bim, you're next.
Oh, hi. My nickname is Dims. I have a longer name if you would like to know. Ping me
Say it
offline.
anyway.
Yeah. I work for Huawei, and I kind of like go find things that are broken and try to fix them and things like that. Generally help out in the project. Mainly work on upstream in Kubernetes, and I used to work on OpenStack as well. So I have a little bit of a background in working in open communities. That's it.
And he's our newest elected steering committee member.
Thank you.
And Clayton, you're next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Clayton Coleman. I work at Red Hat. I've been working on Kubernetes since the day it went public as an open source community. So I feel like I get to do awesome stuff building things that I love to build. And I only get to do that because of community. And so it's the community that like makes this job worthwhile, working on open source. So I am very grateful to everyone who has helped make this community a success over the last X years. I don't even know how long it is now. That's how old I am.
It was announced 1.0 in 2015, July, and it went out June of 14, I think, is when the repo was pushed.
Yeah, like June or early July, yeah. So
June.
Yep,
and
we have our historians on the phone on the line. And Brian, you wanted to do a quick intro?
Yeah, I'm Brian Grant. I work at Google. I've been working on Kubernetes since before it was open sourced, and I worked on the precursors to Kubernetes, Borg and Omega, before that. So I feel like I've been working on it since 2009.
All right. And we have just recently discovered that there have been 6 contributor summits.
Oh, there's another
The first one was in 2014.
Yeah.
Yes. So Brian helped me do some digging for that, so I can properly credit it on banners for the summit. There was a moment there that I was going to click the publish button on 5, but luckily did not. That would have been untrue. All right, so let's kick things off right now. As it stands, I have 7 questions. And again, if you are listening, feel free to DM me in Slack, or feel free to chat with us in the Slack channel of the same name. Again, meet our contributors. So first question, it's a pretty general question for the panel. What's been up for the last 30 days since the last time we talked? What's new? We already discovered DIMS.
Yeah, DIMS is new. That's super exciting.
All right. How did we get to DIMS?
It was our first, no, not our first open election, but our first election after instantiating the steering committee. And I have to say, mad props to our election committee. George and Paris spearheaded that, and there were many others who contributed to making sure we, Ehor, for example, making sure we got a good, unbiased election, a very topical thing for the US this week. Making sure that we got the right people nominated, and then seeing what the community wanted as far as our elected official DIMs.
It's a big milestone. Like, it's all fledgling democracies are not measured by the first election. It's measured by whether the handover goes well. And I think we did our first one of those, and we'll do more in the future.
Yeah, the next handover, or the next election, will be the big handover as we transition the bootstrap continuity membership out of the steering committee. So I think that's going to be the next big one. But you're right, it's very fledgling democracy.
Yeah, we'll end up going from like double digits to 7 people the next time around. So it's going to be a larger election, more people. We will definitely need a load more candidates to step up and volunteer for doing the work in the community, for sure.
Which may lead to one of the questions Paris has.
Yes, I was actually going to say that, but before we went into that, what else are you all working on that's on your backlog right now, that's on your docket?
We continue to push through charters and try
we're getting close, actually.
Yeah, which is super awesome. Part of why we had these continuity members is A, continuity, but also B, we knew the first couple of years was going to be a lot of backlog and a lot of extra effort. I'm not entirely sure we've made as much progress as we wanted, and I will jump up and down and say I'm one of those people who has not contributed as much as I would like to have in the last year. But that will continue to be something we work against.
Right. We are also focusing on trying to get new people engaged. We are trying to build, like, for example, the community in China, the community in India, and trying to get more people like filing good first issues, trying to show what things are of value to the community, and not just PRs with typos. For example, right? How can you go from a PR with typos to the next step, where the next step is actually useful for things that needs to be done for a specific release or for the long-term health of the project? So those kinds of things are becoming more and more, as we go along.
Yeah, and to the point about bringing in new people and getting started, that's one of the reasons we're working on the charters, is to make sure we have clear boundaries on the work that each of the special interest groups is accountable for, and how and where the code and influences intersect in those different groups, so that we have an easy way, again, fledgling democracy, an easy way to know who's in charge of what and who needs to consult whom when you have an intersection.
Yeah, and it's actually it's kind of important to, one of the things we talked about really early on was we wanted to make sure that the community, the people actually contributing the code, the people helping to like bring people together, the people helping to answer questions, that everybody, that responsibility didn't just concentrate in the steering committee, but was actually just something that was owned by someone else. So the charters are the formalization of saying, SIG architecture owns API review and sweeping decisions about the future of the project. And that's the place where people go. And SIG contributor experience owns that. And other people can chime in, but it's not the steering committee making the decisions. It's SIGs.
Because then nothing would really get done.
Nothing would get done. Yeah. Yeah, that would be terrible.
So the charters is one of the many things that we're doing with the continuity members, but also the broader steering committee to write down a bunch of the things that have been informal in the project from the beginning that have evolved over time, just so it's really clear to everyone as people rotate in and out of the project, which is inevitable at this point in the project's, depending on when you count from, there have been people on the project for more than 5 years. And we see, acquisitions happening and other changes in the industry and in the community as well. People move on and go off to do different and other interesting things, even within the Kubernetes community. Sometimes, but maybe not directly on the Kubernetes project. Maybe they work on applications or tools or other things that they see users need when they were working on Kubernetes. So that change is good and healthy and brings in new energized people and new ideas. But we do want to preserve the culture of the project and make sure it continues to function.
Right. Brian, do you want to add a little bit about the SIG architecture stuff? How, the changes that we were talking about last week, where we were trying to write down so that more people can get engaged in SIG architecture?
Yeah, SIG architecture is different from a lot of the SIGs, like SIG API machinery or SIG node, or even SIG scalability. Some of the SIGs have been around for a really long time, not from the very beginning of the project, but from when we first started breaking out sub-efforts and sub-teams. But SIG architecture is a relatively new SIG. It was born out of a leadership summit we had. When was that? That was a couple years ago at this point.
It would have been, June 18 months ago, I think.
But effectively, there were a number of technical decisions that were being made amongst a really, really small group of people who've been on the project basically since the beginning or before the beginning. And SIG architecture was an effort to formalize that itself. And now we're trying to write down some official charter and list of sub-projects for what the SIG should actually do. And it's not intended to just be a social club where we get to bike shed on technical issues, but actually there's a lot of important technical work that needs to get done that has broad impact across the project, like improving the set of conformance tests and ensure that they work for all the different scenarios that people want to use Kubernetes. API review was mentioned. We've had a set of official API reviewers and approvers for a long time, so we're bringing that under the umbrella of SIG architecture as one of the main efforts to ensure the consistency and coherence of the API surface of the project, which as an API-centric system is
very important.
Yes, very, very important. It's the way everything interacts with Kubernetes. And that is something that users say that they value. So formalizing that governance, we have been writing down API conventions for a long time, but we're now trying to write down the API review process itself, so we can get more people who do actually have a fair amount of the knowledge that is required, bring those people into the process and help with the API review load. We started with 4 APIs, and people could guess which ones they might be, but now we have over 60, right? So the surface is much larger, and not every change can be reviewed by the same tiny set of people.
It seems
Although
like
Jordan makes a good go at it.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, he does.
Seems like
So
what are the 4 APIs that we started with is a great trivia question. So we should
save the answer for that.
Yep.
I'm loaded full of great trivia questions.
Oh, we know this. So this is another point in the whole continuity work that we're doing and trying to make sure that this information gets written down, gets shared, gets passed on, so that in the event that Brian ever decides he wants to do something else, for which we would be terribly sad, that there is this knowledge captured, and we don't actually just have to always call Brian, which leads yeah. Because right now the answer is we call Brian.
To find out how many contributor summits there are.
Yes, yes. And the subject line is usually "Dear Historian."
Well, one tip with Brian is don't ping him on GitHub notifications.
Yes. Probably don't ping any of us on GitHub notifications.
Although somehow Clayton miraculously notices them. I don't understand how that works.
I occasionally see something and then I jump in completely unprepared and I make some proclamation and then disappear and no one ever sees it again. It's not exactly the most effective way of doing it, I'll say that.
Yeah. But seriously, please do ping us on Slack if you have a question or a concern. We are pretty friendly. And
yeah, I haven't had to black hole Slack yet, fortunately.
Where can people find charters?
Those are in the community repo. Each SIG has a subdirectory. There is a big list of SIGs, both as Markdown and as sigs.yaml, which is the source of truth for it's the directory of SIGs. And the charters reside in each subdirectory. And there should be a link from the big SIG list to the charters. Generally, it's called charter.md in some SIG subdirectory.
All right. So we just heard that there was an election. There is a question for Dim specifically about his experience with the election. The question is from someone who's interested in running next year, which is awesome. Dims, what is a good tip for someone who is interested in running, especially something that they can't necessarily find in documentation?
Right. In some ways, people need to know you to vote for you. And for doing that, you need to increase your presence in the community. It doesn't need to be something, being on all the time, doing everything by yourself. It's not like that. It's more about trying to do simple things like triaging issues, helping out with pull requests, and trying to, yes, Brian?
I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm waiting for you to finish.
Okay. So, and do the things. So there's a lot of things that get done in the community, but there's a lot of things that do not get done, and there are technical debt and things like that. So make it a point to go look for long-term issues where users are really asking for something, but because of one reason or the other, we haven't been able to do it. Advocate for the end users. Advocate for make things easier for people who are contributing. Try to welcome them and things like that. That'll help you with not just what you're doing, but in the general well-being of the community as well. So once you are able to do that, then everything else will flow naturally. Like standing for elections or anything like that. Brian.
Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to emphasize that I really like what Tim said, and I think it does really work. We don't want people to have to campaign for the elections. We want it to be natural. Everybody would already know you and appreciate you because you were chopping wood and carrying water, and you already understand how the project works because you've already interacted with a number of people across a number of different functions on the project, right? That's basically the ideal scenario, right? We don't want to make it a super political process. We want it to be obvious who the right people are for this job. And, you can do anything from triaging issues, that kind of chopping wood and carrying water generates a lot of gratitude as well. It's just making the whole project function better. Like I noticed that there's some people jumping in, triaging PRs to come in, although I think we now have to change dev stats to take that into account because it's changing the meaning of time to first engagement. But there's also just a ton of steering committee work, and it doesn't have to be just the steering committee doing it, right? So a typical thing we tell people at Google and probably other companies is you want to get promoted, do the job, right? If you're already doing the job, people are more than happy to give you the reins, right? There's more than enough work for everybody on the project.
Sarah?
Yeah, I was going to say that the other thing that you in looking to work on the steering committee, this isn't really about building a platform for change and for, these are my ideas or what I think needs to happen. It's a whole lot more of enabling what is happening and what the community is asking for and looking for. So this is much more like servant leadership than what I really think the project should be doing is blah, and here's my platform. So the whole idea of chopping wood and carrying water and fixing pain points for the community is really the goal of the steering committee. We occasionally have opinions, and we will argue about them vociferously when we do, but we are always doing this and working with the community's focus as the community and the end users focus as our first principles.
I was going to say, yeah, if you want to lead, be in a SIG. Like that's where leadership happens in Kubernetes. Steering committee is about making sure everybody else can succeed at leading.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The other thing that I would add here is, like, if you find a small bug, yes, you can create a PR and you are able to get it merged, and you will get a +1 in the dev stats. But then if you can log a good first issue, then you are actually helping a new person who, and you can help them do the PR, and you kind of like multiply the force that you're providing to the community, right? That is of more value than actually you doing the PR, even if it's a small one. So I think we have to switch gears to make sure that people who occasionally contribute can be productive in the community, not just the people who are working 9 to 5 or Monday through Friday kind of scenario as well.
It's an excellent point, especially if you can bring in the person, that you're logging the issue, but you also know somebody who can help on a thing, and then bring them in and help guide them through the process.
Good tips. All right. Speaking of casual contributors, someone pinged me, and they are currently casually contributing on their own time. Unfortunately, they want to do it during work, and they're having some issues with their current manager allowing them to do upstream work during like a 9 to 5, essentially. What are some business justifications that this individual could give to? Oh, Sarah's like, I know this. What are some business justifications that this individual can give to their manager as to reasons why they should be allowed to do some kind of upstream development?
So I will tell you the key to getting your manager to align with something you want to do is always finding how this also contributes against a pain point they have. So open source can be strategically important in a number of ways for companies, but making sure that you align your pitch to your manager's pain point is the first thing. So maybe your team is overloaded and really needs to be recruiting. So this is a way that you can identify other good people who might be potential recruits for your company. Say your team is looking to identify more customers for a product or an engagement. Find how contributing to Kubernetes can identify potential sales leads. You can talk about how you are trying to the recruiting idea. Again, you could be raising your visibility, the visibility of your company in a very exciting community, a very exciting ecosystem. Say your company is very interested in engaging in initiatives around diversity and inclusion. You could talk about growing your career path and bringing in mentoring additional people, work being done if, say, you need to, again, bring in a recruit or just show that you are working in the industry on efforts that focus on diversity and inclusion. Anybody else have other? I mean, I'm thinking marketing. I'm thinking recruiting. I'm thinking sales. What business vertical did I miss?
Always being on the know of what's happening in this
Excellent point.
industry.
Yeah.
You know what features are coming out, which
Yeah.
could help them as an end user
Yeah.
be influential with what's
Mhm.
getting built.
Yeah, if you
Brian?
search for extrinsic and intrinsic motivations for open source, you can find a lot of ammunition. There are a lot of articles, there are academic articles, there are studies. Um, you can listen to people from prior KubeCons who said, we're so happy we contributed to the community. Here's why. We wanted to be part of a community that other people gave back to, so we don't have to face this all ourselves. We don't have to solve all the problems all ourselves. We have people we can go to ask questions. We can have people we can share tools with. There are open source projects where people don't share back to the community that way. And then they get a leg up by starting with the open source, and then they're all on their own, right? Which is a little bit better than creating your own bespoke infrastructure for everything. But it's not nearly the same experience as being in a community where there is a culture of sharing back, and it just magnifies uh, the impact and the benefit of the entire ecosystem, right? So when a lot of people say they like the community, part of it is, they have folks they can ask questions, they can chat war stories at meetups, and part of it is just the ecosystem of tools and knowledge that is created.
So I'll jump on with that. Sorry, Dims. And the point, another point, especially if you're a small company, because those are a lot of the times where it's really hard to justify. If you're a very small company, the peer group that you can get, and the amount of help you can get from the broader community against even problems that you're working on your own in the inside the company is huge. There's a huge value in that.
Right. I mean, the other thing that I can think of is it's not like a one-time deal. You just pick up version 112 of Kubernetes and you're done, right? You have to invest, time and effort in trying to learn what the community is doing. Make sure you're in the feedback loop with new features that are being talked about, or participate in the KIP process and try to understand why we are doing what we are trying to do. And also, you have to get to the point where when you have to face an upgrade situation from 112 to 113 or 115, you are prepared for it. And it doesn't come as a shock. Okay, how many things have changed? Oh my God, I can't do an upgrade. So you will end up in a situation where you don't understand why the community did what it did, and you will have trouble if you do not invest in trying to sync back with what is happening in the community as well. So
Although we really want to fix the you will have trouble into it is easier if.
exactly, right. So avoid the troubles and
Yeah.
make it easier for yourself to be engaged in the community. And it's not just that. You are bringing your own set of problems, and you are trying to find the best way to fix it for everybody, not just yourself, right? So that's part of the thing for me.
All excellent tips and advice. I have so many questions right now. I've been trying to write them all down and group them. I've been getting tons of questions and DMs. I have a few that are similar. I'm combining them in my head right now. It looks like folks want to know tips for technical disputes. Also tips on building influence. So lots of, I guess, current contributors who are actively engaged on the project and I guess maybe disagree with technical decisions that are going down. How can they have their voice heard? How can they grow influence within the project? Dims, I see you shaking your head. Did you want to lead off?
Oh no, I was just acknowledging what you're saying. Those are all good questions. Maybe we should start with the first one first. What was the first one, Paris?
So, how do you? What are some tips for dealing with technical disputes It sounds like this individual is very confident that they are correct. So what are some advice? What's some advice there? And then also in that same kind of regard, how can one gain influence within the project so that they can be seen as a technical decision maker / in an owner's file?
Well, I can start off on the latter first. I think that's a good place to start. Daniel calls this techno-social capital. Other people just call it building karma. But
That's a
Dim's talked.
great name, though, the techno-social capital.
Yeah. Dim's talked about just starting with, filing issues, helping the project go more smoothly. That's also true on the technical side, right? There is a huge amount of grungy work that needs to get done. Bugs that need to be fixed, code that needs to be refactored, tests that need to be debugged or deflaked, tests that need to be written. So there's no shortage of this sort of bread and butter kind of software engineering work, and it doesn't advance your pet feature, but it does advance your techno-social capital, right? It helps people see on a regular basis that you are very capable, that you're meticulous, that you care about code quality, that you develop an understanding of how the system works at a technical level and what the impacts of changes are to correctness or test flakes or scalability, to the release getting out on time, right? So that doesn't come quickly, but it is how it works, right? Like fundamentally, people need to trust you. No matter how great of work you did outside the project before, if people haven't worked with you before, it's hard for other people to really understand that. And also, there are different styles of coding, for example, and not some different styles may be equally valid in different contexts, um, but may not fit with how the project is actually being developed. And that can be in the small, like whether you write code that looks like Java, or it can be in the large in terms of how systems are architected, right? And definitely one thing that I want to do in SIG architecture, for example, is improve the documentation about the system design so that the overall architecture doesn't degrade over time and really become kind of non-obvious. And that sometimes forces decisions to somewhat be more rigid. The reason may be consistency and keep the system understandable and working the same way it was before. And even though there may be for individual decisions ways of doing things that are superior in some other dimension, right?
I was going to add to that, Brian, actually, like a lot of where we are as a project is Kubernetes is big, and there's a lot of people who use Kubernetes, and so some of the natural tension is between being cautious and being patient and being slow. Slow and steady wins the race when we can make a change and script someone's production infrastructure. So like looking for ways of building the trust so that people trust you as an individual to be thinking about these things as you grow as an engineer, as a contributor, as a communicator, looking for those places where you've built enough trust that when you do make the change, you have the trust of others, so that when changes, nothing's perfect. Brian and I have occasionally been very, very wrong about some things, and being able to have the trust of others so that the relationship between you and the person that might disagree about what you've done or how the design might work is that you can resolve that and then fix the problem and then do better next time. It really is. It's hard to contribute to big open source projects because they're big communities with a lot of people who have to all be in sync to some degree, and that's hard.
Yeah. And the bigger the change you make, the bigger that people have to see your commitment as, right? Because there will be unforeseen consequences, and they will need to get fixed. Right. And so people have to trust that you'll be around to fix them.
Yeah. The other thing we haven't touched about is do your homework, right? It's important to figure out how to discover information in the Kubernetes projects. What repositories are there? How does each SIG work? Where are the Google Docs? Where are the KEPs? What is the history of a particular problem? Is it logged in an issue? Did it come out of a PR? So do your homework, so you know the background of why a decision was taken before you come up with a solution and say, okay, this is the best solution there is. But you understand what was the organic process by which we are currently at a stage where we are now. So that helps out a lot as well when you are talking to people, because not everybody remembers everything. So when you present information this way, people will know that you have done your homework and you know the pros and cons of the different options that are there and why you are advocating for a specific change.
Sarah, that sounds like a phrase you use. Actually, what's the phrase you use? Something about don't try to change a community if you haven't done your homework, or something along those lines.
I talk about moving communities too fast and getting immune reaction.
Yeah.
If you come to a group and say you're doing it wrong, however you start this conversation, you're going to get just an immune reaction. You don't necessarily know, especially if you're new to a community or you don't have a lot of influence yet. There isn't that commutative trust, as Brian was describing. Like, hey, I've worked with Clayton long enough that I don't quite understand why he's pushing it. He's got to have a really good reason. And so he gets some goodwill just from having done as much work as he has. But there's the commutative trust piece. There's the making sure that you're not trying to press a change too fast for a group, because there's a lot of, especially in a project of this size, there's a lot of accreted decision making that gives constraints at this point. And so while your solution may be perfectly elegant and the best technical solution, independent of everything else in the project, it may not be the best technical solution for the project. And that is not a place or I described dying on hills. Let's not die on that hill, because it's not worth it's not worth the fight, and it does damage to your technosocial capital. One of the other points I was going to add fundamentally in technical disagreements is do your homework on the other side as well. Why is the other position being advocated? Why is this person as willing to butt heads with you as they are, especially if they have more influence in the project and have been with the project longer? They may know something you don't at that point. And so making sure you understand why that person believes that their position, if it really is a person against person, technical battle to the death or something, find out what that is. Influence is a whole lot about empathizing and understanding where the other person is coming from. And then, as I said in the answer around businesses, aligning your interests, making sure that you are trying to get to the same place when you may be trying to answer two different problems with these solutions. So make sure that you've got aligned interests, and then try to understand what has led to both technical solutions.
Yeah, we're also becoming more and more risk adverse as we have more and more users using Kubernetes in production. We've had a lot of test escapes. We've had broken compatibility a number of times. So one thing I'm looking at right now is how we can improve reliability and compatibility release over release. So that may require different measures when trying to convince people. Like, it used to be we were very willing to accept partial implementations and move quickly. And now we're at a stage where we're much more conservative. So you may need to prototype the feature in a feature branch so that people can see what the more complete solution looks like. You may need to come up with a more complete test plan. You may need to be willing to put something into the next release instead of this release because we don't have enough bandwidth to review all the changes or really think hard about all the gotchas. So the bar is necessarily getting higher for making major changes.
All right. That leads us into the next question, which has to do with time and your time specifically. We always hear that everyone is super busy. What's a part of the project that you wish you had more time to work on? For instance, what SIG would you join if you had more time? What project has been kicked up that you are watching and really wish you could help out with? There's just not enough time in the day. Sarah.
I would spend more time with SIG contributor experience again. That is one of the things that
I paid her to say that.
Chocolate is always welcome. Turn around, you can leave it on my desk. It'll be fine. SIG contributor experience, I think, is the heart of how this project actually runs as successfully as it does. And any efforts that are put into that to make the contributor experience better, make the engagement with new contributors, make the engagement with existing contributors, supporting contributors. Like, this is why it's called contributor experience. That for me is where I would spend my time again. Sadly, I have had to step away from it. But as I said, my real claim to fame in this community is hiring Paris to take on so many of these things.
I did not pay her to say that.
So for me, it's where we make the sausage, SIG testing. That's where it's very important that we get more people involved across SIGs, because when you see a flake, when you see a lot of rechecks on something, some specific CI job, we don't have enough people who help us out in trying to figure out why the things are failing, or why some job is flaky, why some tests are flaky across jobs. So I wish we could figure out how to turn more of us who work across SIGs, not just like SIG node or SIG storage, but then get to the point where they are able to help out with trying to figure out why the CI jobs, how to make the CI jobs better, how to make sure that the coverage is better, how to make sure that conformance is better. I think we definitely need to figure out a way to get people to get there.
Dims, you already spend so much time there. I don't know how it would be physically possible for you to spend more.
Right. The force multiplier effect needs to kick in here, Paris. So,
Clayton, what about you? What's a project you wish you could work on, or a sub-project, or anything that's kicked up that is interesting?
It's funny. I spend a lot of my time feeling guilty because I'm not spending enough time doing the things I should do, because I'm spending all my time doing the things I should do. So a lot of what I would like to do from a Q perspective is spend more time doing API review and helping automate API review and helping make sure that API review happens. Because API review is kind of it's like we get one chance to make an API forever, and you can definitely be way too rigid and never let anything in, and then you're not happy. Brian talked about how we're trying to be more stable, so that takes some of the pressure off. But we're continually coming up, we don't want to shut the project off and just say okay, it's never going to change, we're just going to fix bugs, because that's not useful for the people who use Kubernetes day to day. So trying to do more to offload and get that process going for API review, for it to be really, really something you just you go through. It feels, just another part of the process. Today, it feels a little bit more like gatekeeping, and it's gatekeeping because we don't ever get a chance to undo a mistake once we published it. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything. I'm a firm believer.
And we also try to help people create the right APIs.
Right. Yeah. And spending more time up front. Thank you, Brian. That was actually, I want to spend even more time up front so that I don't have to do anything later. So that it's hey, this was maybe it's not the perfect API, but it's consistent and meets all these factors, and we can evolve it in the future. Those kinds of things. That's often the most challenging part, that if people just knew that ahead of time, it would have saved them a lot of trouble, which saves me a lot of trouble.
Yeah, one question there, Clayton. What do what is the current thinking about like CRDs and its usage in the core API? Do you have anything that you want to?
It's interesting because I'm very like, this is like, I'll put my I wrote a large chunk of the API machinery code, and everybody on the project curses me for it when they remember that I was involved in it. Fortunately, people are starting to forget. So, if you run into codecs or serializers or parts of the scheme, like, that's Daniel's fault, but it's also my fault.
Hey, blameless postmortems.
Blameless postmortems. And so some of that, some of the, just the messiness of we want to have really big clusters and we want things to scale. And so there's a lot of parts of me that are like, we want to take control of it. But CRs are very much don't worry about it too much. They're not very rigid on schema. You can't do clever things with validation, but that's okay. And I think as a project, for us to grow, we basically have to release a little bit of that control and let, a little bit of CR flexibility kind of come into the core of the project, because that's the only way that other people can build on top of Kubernetes. It's the only way we can scale.
Yeah. So I'm going to pitch that Tim has a KubeCon lightning talk on this very topic. But from an architectural point of view, we've been trying to build extension mechanisms like CRDs, which itself is built using another extension mechanism, API aggregation. And in fact, they can be used together in interesting ways. Like, you can run an extension server separately and then aggregate it into your cluster, right? So it gives you a lot of freedom to implement new APIs. Kubernetes was designed to be composable from a concept point of view, but in fact ended up being mostly monolithic. There's the monolithic API server and a monolithic controller manager. So what I see CRs is, really, I think of them as dynamic resources. It's just another way to create APIs. And some of them might be user-defined, and there are over 500 projects on GitHub the last time we counted that are actually using them. But you could do interesting things, like you can upgrade a controller and its API independent of the rest of the cluster, right? If you define it using a custom resource definition. They are constrained, but the constraints keep people from shooting themselves in the foot. Like, when we've done fairly creative things across API versions, it's been actually really, really hard to make it work the way that you would actually want it to work. So the constraints themselves have value to make it easier to design APIs, provided you can stay within those constraints. So I think that, now that we have the mechanism, it behooves us to try to, figure out how we can make it as usable as possible, so we can reduce the scope of changes in the monolithic core. And as we see, more and more uses of it, there are a lot of talks at KubeCon about how people are using custom resources. So I think that's a space to watch.
My pithy comment is, the cluster of the future is hundreds of CRs, and they're all going to be important, and they're all going to need the things that we want them to have. So we're gonna get there. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah, we might even convert some of the existing resources to CRs if we can figure out how to do that. Now that we're building, and CRs together with other features like aggregation, like admission webhooks, are more useful than CRs just on their own. So I think as people start to do interesting things, we'll see more and more use cases, figure out more and more ways that we can use them and evolve them.
And to the question that we had about influence around technical decisions, this was a big contention point for a while. Both the API aggregator and the CRDs and the webhooks, if I remember correctly. How did we come to the decisions? Ryan, Clayton, do you want to touch this question with a 10-foot pole?
Well, there are some thorny technical issues in the initial design, and there were somewhat of a priority mismatch. We were creating actually APIs that had a different storage backend, right? Custom resource definitions, one of the main values people find is that it shares the same storage backend with the cluster so they don't have to run their own. But the initial use case for aggregation was for custom metrics, which was a resource that had a different storage backend, right? So there was a prioritization mismatch when we were in the middle of doing aggregation. And also we ended up using, in the rewrite of third-party resource to custom resource, we ended up using aggregation to implement that. So the extension server that serves CRDs is actually a separate API server that's aggregated in.
Yeah, I would add too, like at the time we didn't have enough of the tools to actually make custom resources secure for some of the use cases that people had. And so as we added those tools, some of the needs went down. I do think aggregate APIs are really good for resources that sit in front of custom resources or sit in front of other resources. Like metrics is actually just a fake. Metrics is talking to things and building little caches and then returning it. Other people do aggregated APIs that take other Kube resources and then show a different view of them that stitches in data. I think like probably over time, aggregated APIs will end up more as in front of things where you need to pretend that it's something else, while custom resources will be like the raw data that maybe like, you know, the underlying things talk to or admins talk to, and maybe end users might talk to aggregated APIs when you don't want to let them touch all the details, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I was also hoping, Clayton can tell me whether this will ever happen, but I was also hoping that OpenShift would be able to use API aggregation.
So
its APIs.
We're very close to it. We were really blocked on emission control because that was like how do you extend Kube to put policy in, because we were very like, oh, we're going to do soft multi-tenancy. Turns out soft multi-tenancy is hard unless you really control who can do what. So like we're actually getting close to the point, and maybe we'll talk about this at KubeCon, about how close we are to running on top of Kube versus being like as a plugin to Kube versus being
embedding Kube.
So maybe stay tuned for KubeCon.
Heard it here first.
Yeah, that's been a long time coming. That was a deliberate decision that we made at the beginning. Is, you know, we would have kind of compiled in LinkedIn plugin points because it's easier. So it was done out of expedience on both sides, both for OpenShift and for the upstream project. And then once we figured out what we really needed out of the extensions, because we had to build, you know, the policy mechanisms and whatever, then we came back to build out of process, out of binary extension points. And CRs, I'll point out, we still don't know when they'll be GA, right? There are a bunch of hard problems that we still need to solve, whereas aggregation's been GA for a while at this point. So it's a long technical road, but you know, people are finding it useful, and I'm hoping we'll find it useful also to make Kube less monolithic. But you know, it definitely is the harder of the paths, so we weren't wrong about that.
All right, last question. It's a doozy. How do you balance your employer's agenda with what's good for the community?
So I'll say that this one, I'll jump right in on this. At the end of the day, I think most people who work on Kube would agree that the end purpose is to make things that work well for the people who use Kube. And if you're working on Kube and that's not your goal, I don't know why you're working on Kube, because the point of building software is to make it useful for someone. And I think most of the challenges people see are when the different types of users of Kube, like there's immensely different users of Kube. Like there are people who care very deeply about security and have a heart attack every time a new Kube release comes out. And there's people who say, why are you putting all these RBAC rules in front of my single person cluster? You just destroyed my workflow. The community, like I would say, I would expect everybody who contributes to Kube to understand what user you're focusing on, user of Kube, and to balance that. So for Red Hat, like we're an open source company, but we build software and give it to enterprise customers who ask for crazy, scary things like access control. And trying to represent, when you're working on that one type of user, you need to remember that there's these other users of Kube, and they will not be happy when you break them. And that has to be, well, if I break them, then I can't, my my users aren't happy, because then I can't make changes to Cube, or I can't convince other people that I'm really working in everybody's best interest. So I try to tie it back to, you have to remember to be able to talk about, you've got your users and you have to empathize with everybody else's users. And you have to be able to say, I'm going to help me and you and your users and your other users. And everybody I know on Cube who I've worked with knows how to do that. And sometimes, like, we don't always communicate it well, but I actually am pretty, like, I've been impressed with every single person who's contributed to Cube in terms of trying to do the right thing for users.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think most people working on Kubernetes care pretty deeply about our users, and it's, I would say that there's no conflict really, because the bigger the community, the more users there are, the bigger the ecosystem. It's a virtuous cycle that benefits everybody who has a stake in Kubernetes, right? It was actually created for the purpose of creating that huge ecosystem that spans, multiple clouds, and even Edge, running it in Edge and Raspberry Pis, education, like all these other use cases, some of which we didn't really imagine, like using it as an installer for distributed software on. But those all those scenarios and use cases make the whole ecosystem stronger and bigger and better. So the main constraint is time, right? So it becomes a prioritization question more than anything else.
And that's where the pain comes in, is when we are trying to focus, two different people or two different groups are trying to focus on two different sets of users, and something has to be prioritized. And that's usually where our pain points come in. And then it just becomes alignment of interests at that point.
I'll add that, like, at the end of the day, we're just humans trying to do a human job, and everybody gets stressed and all that. Building trust with people so that they understand that you're trying to do the right thing is one of the best ways to help influence priorities, because if I trust you, I don't have to know everything you're doing, and sometimes I have to resync. But like, that trusting helps set priorities, because two people can work on independent things and both of them can be confident that everybody else, and the more trust that exists between the different parts of the project, the easier it is for priorities to be evenly balanced, because you don't have to obsessively checkbox an agile waterfall scrum list of every top priority of the project and divide Brian's time into 1 minute intervals. I mean, that's going to happen because that's what Brian does. But trying to say, like, I'm going to build trust with this team so that we can set joint priorities. Every little bit you do that makes the whole project more efficient. It may not look like that sometimes, but it really does.
And then Dim's with the final word.
Don't get hung up on one specific problem or one specific solution. You are in this for the long haul. So, try to take it easy on yourself and others as well.
That was excellent advice. And on that, we are done for this month's Meet Our Contributors Steering Committee edition. The next one is, December 5th at the same time, actually. We have Steering Committee AMA for, I think, the next 3 months at this time, since the other slot collides with their regular Steering Committee meeting. Thank you so much to our panelists today. You all are great. Thank you so much for your dedication to the community. And we're out.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.